So what I was saying is the article that I found with Sisters of Mercy, it did a great job of detailing and defining what racism looks like, because maybe you just don't know. You don't see what the big deal is. And I have heard people who I'm friends with who are Caucasian say, well, what's the big deal? You guys were never slave. I mean, that was in the old days. I've never known you to have to do any, to have to live with segregation. But this particular article did a great job of discussing what racism looks like, and also did a great job of allowing for young people to have a point of action, because it's great to protest, but to activate change, what can you do to activate change? And I think that passion is there, and that's understandable. The disgust, the anger, all of those things. But what do we do? How do we corral all of that righteous anger into action for better, being the hands and feet of Christ? Specifically, especially to the people that I've been called to. I believe that even through this, God can be glorified, and we can work together to love like Christ and do away with the stronghold of racism and the evil that is persisting as a result of it. So I'm going to, you'll see me glance down my notes. I'm going to review some of the highlighted points that I found in the article. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and link it so you can refer to it, and I think it's well done. Yes, they are, Sisters of Mercy are Catholic, and I think God can use any vessel that He wants to. No, I'm not a Catholic, but I did find a lot of truth in this particular article. So let's get started. So it does a great point of saying, yes, racism does exist. No, it's not overt as it was in times past. It's far more subtle now. And they did a great job in the article. They talked about 4 patterns of racism. So we'll go ahead and go through those. The first one, pattern 1, is spatial racism. And that's a pattern of metropolitan development. So you'll see it where affluent neighborhoods will create racial and economic segregation. So what they'll do is affluent members of society will go and they'll move to the suburbs, and they'll take all their affluence and all of the purchasing power with them to the suburbs. Or if you see it in the city, what will happen is that there'll be pockets of gentrified neighborhoods where all of the affluence is it's concentrated in one area within that city, and the poor, typically the African American Hispanic community, cannot afford to live in that area. And so what they'll do is they'll go ahead and have everything in one particular area. Another way this looks is that and I mean, one of the results of this is that it leaves the economic poor, mainly, once again, African American, Hispanic, and newly arrived immigrants. Let's not forget, because you may have those who are newly arrived immigrants, or Eastern European, or you may have some Asian who come from a more poor, underdeveloped country, like, say, Laos or Thailand or something. You'll find those type of immigrant communities present as well in this poor, economically poor neighborhoods. And what it does is it isolates them in these deteriorating areas. So they will be isolated to this deteriorating area specifically as a result of the affluence strategically leaving that environment. And what this does is it creates a visual chasm between those who are rich and those who are poor, and oftentimes between Caucasian people and people of color. And what this allows to happen is now you are isolated. Caucasian people of influence are isolated where they're not. They have no need to address the deep effects of racism, or that their influence the impact of their influence on those of other races, because you're shielded from it. You're in a bubble. There's never an occasion in which you have to address this? Oh, somebody walking by the window. Sorry, y'all. I was like, what in the world is that? That's my uncle outside working. So these chasms, this great divide between us, and that's why a lot of white people say, well, I don't see what the big deal is. Of course you don't see what the big deal is, because you're not forced to deal with it in your day-to-day life because of spatial racism, right? That's why. So let's continue. What can we do to address this? What would be a solution to spatial racism? Some of the solutions would be alleviating the lack of decent, affordable housing. So there are lots of affordable housing, quote unquote, but they're not a decent place to live. The conditions are atrocious oftentimes, that people are forced to live in. What are some of the other ways that we can address this? We can address the lack of adequate staff, faculty, building supplies, for these areas, for their public schools. Right now, my mom is teaching for the Atlanta public schools, and a lot of times the resources are limited, and so staff is oftentimes facing burnout because they are trying to do so much with so little resources. So how can we affect change through spatial racism? This is one of the ways. Address the inadequate resource of staff, faculty, building supplies, and in their public schools in these areas. And then what else can we do? There's We need to have more investment for business and commercial opportunities in these areas. That is, without adding in ways for revenue to be generated in these areas, there's no solution. There's nothing that can be done to that. So that's one of the ways that spatial racism impacts African Americans, Hispanics, for the poor. And because of that, there's little to no opportunity for jobs near their home. People don't have access to jobs near their homes, and then there's oftentimes insufficient public transportation to jobs that may exist in the suburbs. So this kind of in the spatial racism allows for us now, for affluent whites to not know that this exists. They not have to face it. They never see working black poor even in their neighborhoods, because they can't even come out there to participate in the job economy that exists out there. So those are some of the things, right? So some of the solutions: we need more affordable housing there, more adequate funding for staff, building supplies, materials. So what does that look like? Like actual solutions for us angered young people. I'm not as young as I used to be, but I guess I'm kind of still a little young. What does that look like? Maybe you want to address this issue. You can become a teacher. You can begin to tutor and help students in these particular areas. You may want to organize something to address that. Maybe you want to do a book bag drive. Maybe you want to buy school supplies. When you go back to school, you and your friends can get together and raise supplies for kids in that area to do something immediate, and then also canvass those particular leaders, that particular district, for better allocation of resources, or determine why is it that there are not more resources there. Those are things that you can do, right? That's to address spatial racism. Number two is institutional racism. And what is this? Okay, so what's institutional racism, right? So they gave a good definition. I'm trying to get my light back. Okay, there it is. Patterns of social and racial superiority that continue as long as no one challenges them. This is what we are experiencing right now, right? We're seeing this repeatedly through the deaths and attempted cover-ups of the abuse of power, and the most recent deaths of Aubrey, Mr. Floyd, Brianna, and so many others, right? This is because within the police culture, white privilege has definitely gone undetected, right? So what this looks like is oftentimes white privilege goes undetected because it is a part of one's worldview. Sorry, I couldn't read my handwriting. By custom, habit, or tradition. That's what's going on right now. That's what we're seeing. So when people say, or when, white America says, well, yeah, this particular one was bad. The reason why you're seeing so many people angered and embittered and enraged is because it's not isolated. They, as we continue to say, it's not isolated. It's now just being recorded because now we have the capabilities to record and advocate for ourselves. Now, because we are able to advocate for ourselves, it means it's being brought to the forefront. But because the institutional racism exists, that they're still able to hide it, or it gets swept under the rug, or it's not being forced to be dealt with in the same manner as other things. And that's typically because of white privilege that is prevalent within these institutions, policing being one of them, right? So it's not just that we as African Americans are overreacting, but it's because it's something systemic that's been going on. And if we don't address the root, we just keep picking off the symptoms, we'll continue to see these things happen. These hashtags keep cropping up, and we're sick of that. So we want to highlight the institutional racism that's existing. The example of these are when an institution devalues the presence, contribution of people of color, and celebrate only the contribution of Caucasians. You may see that in a variety of things. That's often why you see people of color being so excited by African American history. And we're often asked, well, why do we need African American history? Isn't it all American history? It is all American history, but American history does not act to celebrate the contributions of African Americans to our culture and our society in the same way. So Black History Month was created in an effort for that. So this is some of the ways that you'll see institutional racism exists within our culture. Remember, this is all in an effort to educate, not to condemn, not to blame, not to belittle anyone. But these are just the facts, right? So we're here in an effort as me as a woman of God, a follower of Christ, to be able to do that, to be the light to the world. So another way that you'll see that exists within our country is the differing rates in violence against those Black and Hispanic and Asian people, Native people. So there are higher rates of violence within these communities. And then you also will experience it through the disproportionate number of Black and Hispanic and economically poor people who are currently on death row. It is disproportionate, the number of Black and Hispanic people who make up the general population versus those who are currently serving a death sentence. And so that is an example because that's one of the ways that white privilege is continued, is because it allows you to escape the responsibility for crimes, or once another one is the sentencing